What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. I'm going to continue my conversation with you concerning the complete history of boxing. I want to clear up a few things concerning the black bare-knuckle fighter. James Walton was known as the Morocco Prince. He fought from 1833 to 1840. Born March 3rd, 1813. He was sailed to London in 1820. Young Richmond, the athlete, fought from 1821 to 1822. Bob Travers, the Black Wonder, fought from 1854 to 1864. Bob Smith was known as the Liverport Darky, fought from 1863 to 1866. He weighed 146 pounds, stood 5 foot 10 and a half inches, and he was a black American fighter out of Washington, D.C., born March 11th, 1840. July 2nd, 1863. Now, Captain Harvahan had arranged a match for Bob Smith, September 15th, 1863. He would face Harry Burgess. 43 rounds, 50-pound side bet. The Black Sailor fought from 1846 to 1850. Stood 6 foot 1 and a half inches, weighed 212 pounds. He looked like Hercules. He was a very strong athlete. Now, the reason why I'm bringing up the Black Sailor, John Perry, he had a younger brother who would face William Perry, who was England's heavyweight champion. John Perry would become the second black fighter to win a title. I'll explain in one moment. But he would be the first black fighter to win an Australian title when he took on a fighter who was hardly mentioned. His name is George Hughes. The first bout, January 10th, 1846, John Perry would knock out Bill Burden and Lee Chester. He was known as the Black. But then he would face George Hughes for Australian heavyweight championship recognition. He would defeat him, and he would become the Australian heavyweight champion. The contest was performed at the Cunning Point. John Perry had a younger brother by the name of Harry Perry, and Harry Perry would be the one who would defeat William Perry. William Perry was England's heavyweight champion. Tell you about William Perry for one moment. Now, William Perry was known as the Tipton Slasher. He was born March 21st, 1819 in Tipton, England. He weighed 185 pounds and stood 6 foot and a half inches. He'd be in a ring with Ben Spilsbury. He defeated him in 7 rounds, December 27th of 1836. He would also take on Tom Podlock and Walking Common. He won on a foul and 22 rounds, December 17th, 1836. I want to speak on Benjamin Count for one moment. Benjamin Count was from England. He weighed 210 pounds. He stood 6 foot 2 and a half inches. The reason why I'm bringing up Benjamin Count, he was a champion. Benjamin Count had offered a 500-pound side bet. The offer was to be given to him. Now, John Perry had a mentor. His name was Johnny Broome. Johnny Broome was a former lightweight champion of England. And it just shows you, and I mentioned this in a video earlier, how you can price yourself out of a fight. Benjamin Count was very big, very strong, but he was very intimidated because he heard about this young man, John Perry. And he offered a side bet that was so huge, even for its time, that it was no way possible that Johnny Broome and John Perry together can come up with that kind of money. So Benjamin Count had lost to a fighter by the name of Bendigo. He dismissed the loss as though it never happened. Then he would fight Bendigo again, and that one was on the level as far as Benjamin Count was concerned, so he owned up to that second fight. But he had the business handed to him by Bendigo, and he dismissed it. So he continued as though nothing happened, and he was still a title holder. But I wanted to add a few things before I end this conversation. Tom Molyneux was the first black fighter to win a title. I'm going to explain. He took on Tom Cribb in 1810. That's not where he won the title, because it was for England's heavyweight championship title, owned by Tom Cribb. But Tom Molyneux in the 33rd round, was jobbed. We went through that story hundreds of times. But he was recognized as a champion. So he's technically, I'm speaking of Tom Molyneux, a champion. He was the first black champion. The second black champion was John Perry. He would win the Australian heavyweight championship title when he defeated George Hughes. And the third black champion was George Dixon. Now, the distinction of George Dixon, and I'm talking about major titles. George Dixon was the only athlete to win a title overseas. He was the only athlete to win a crown of any kind, any sport overseas. It was against Luke Wallace. That's the distinction of George Dixon. He was not the first black fighter to win a title. He was the first black fighter to win universal recognition as champion. There's a big difference. But he wasn't the first black fighter to win a title in general. So that's the distinction we have to clarify. He was the first black fighter to win universal recognition as champion. He was the first. But John Perry was the second black fighter to win a title, an Australian title. And then you would have the first black fighter, and that was Tom Molyneux. Again, it wasn't the English heavyweight championship title that he tried to win in 1810 against Tom Cribb. He didn't win that because of foul play, but he was recognized as a champion. Now, Henry Armstrong. What distinguishes Henry Armstrong from any other fighter in the entire history of the game? Henry Armstrong was the first black featherweight American champion. And he was the second black fighter to win that title in Madison Square Garden. Huge, very important. And what was even more important, he accomplished that feat, breaking another outstanding record that no one has ever broken. He went 27-0 with 26 knockouts. In 1937, the year he won the title, the year he became the first black American featherweight champion. George Dixon was the featherweight champion of Canada. Kid Chocolate was a featherweight champion. He was from Cuba. Henry Armstrong was the first black American featherweight champion, and he was the only fighter in that weight division, the second fighter of black descent to win that title in Madison Square Garden. Now, Edwin Valero, he retired with a record of 27-0 with 27 knockouts, but it took him 8 years to accomplish that. Henry Armstrong was 27-0 with 26 knockouts, and 1 year alone, 1937. That same year, he would win the featherweight championship title. And the man he did not knock out was Aldo Spoldi, and he knocked him out twice after that. Now, Joe Gans was the first American athlete to win a title. He was the first man to drive a car. And here's the thing with him. He would win a title in 1902. He would lose it in 1908. But right after him came the first black heavyweight champion, and that was Jack Johnson, 1908 to 1915. So between the lightweight division and the heavyweight division, sandwiched in between, black fighters dominated the belts. And that's the reason why Jack Johnson was despised, because he laughed at the establishment when they tried to get rid of Joe Gans. and he came along and he carried the mantle, so to speak. Henry Armstrong would win 3 titles simultaneously, but he won featherweight to welterweight, back down to lightweight. Bob Fitzsimmons would win the middleweight championship title. He would move up to the heavyweight division and challenge Jim Corbett. Took him out in 14 rounds. Fought him in Carson City, Nevada, with the famous solar plexus punch. But then he would go back down to the light heavyweight division in 1903 and defeat George Gardner. The difference between Henry Armstrong and Bob Fitzsimmons is that Henry Armstrong would hold all 3 of those titles. Bob Fitzsimmons never defended his light heavyweight championship crown. After Joe Gans will be the unified world lightweight champion, the next black fighter to hold that title and hold that distinction would be Ike Williams in 1947. He would win the NBA lightweight championship title 1945 when he would knock out Juan Zorita in Mexico City in 2 rounds. But he only took the National Boxing Association title. And that happened because when Juan Zorita faced Sammy Ingat came back after retirement. He would face Davey Day. Then he would face Luther Slugger White, But the title was split. When it got split was because Bo Jack, who was supposed to face Tippy Larkin, Ali Stoltz was also in line, but one of the other titles that Sammy Ingat had. And so Bo Jack had to pay out $10,000 to Ali Stoltz to get that opportunity. That was a robbery. But that's the only way he could have gotten a fight. The same way Joe Louis had to distribute 10% of his earnings for the next 10 years, turned out to be the remainder of his career, to James Braddock in 1937 to get the fight with him so he can become champion. Because they didn't want Braddock to try and face Max Schmeling. They wanted Joe Louis. They could make tremendous amount of money on that fight. And it was 2 countries who are at ends with one another. And they both had pawns to negotiate. That wouldn't have happened with Braddock. It would happen with Louis and Schmeling because Schmeling had defeated Louis in 1936. The only problem they had was where they were going to house the contest. The reason why Braddock got screwed over was because his manager, Joe Gould, he tried to get all the Jewish members in the concentration camp, trying to word this. And he wanted them all released. And that was not going to happen. So the fight didn't happen. So what Joe Gould did, he sat and spoke with Mike Jacobs. And said, well, you know what? We'll give Joe Louis the fight. But we need 10% of every purse for 10 years. See, these are the stories that are very important to understand. Archie Moore will receive $800 in the contest in 1952 when he faced Joey Maxim. Maxim earned $100,000. This was robbery. The contract he signed included Joey Maxim for 3 or 4 fights. And he also included himself the manager, Jack Kearns, who was the manager of Mickey Walker and Jack Dempsey, was a part of the package. So regardless of who would win the belt, Maxim or Archie Moore, every time they fought, I want you to understand, Jack Kearns will be the manager of that champion, whoever it was. These are the things that took place. So back to Bojack when he defeated Ali Schultz. It was an upset in the making because they were trying to get two New Jersey fighters, Tippy Larkin and Ali Schultz. Didn't happen because Bojack would defeat Ali Schultz. Then he went on and fought Tippy Larkin and knocked him out in 3 rounds in Madison Square Garden. And that's how Bojack became the New York Sack lightweight champion. He went back and forth with Bob Montgomery. They earned $1 apiece when they raised close to over $100 million in war bonds. They earned $1 apiece in New York's Madison Square Garden. Bob Montgomery would then lose his title to Ike Williams, who was the NBA lightweight champion. And Ike Williams would knock out Bob Montgomery in 6 rounds, and he would then become the second black fighter to be universally recognized as the world lightweight champion. That's how long the history goes back. Pernell Whitaker would be the third black unified, recognized black lightweight champion, boxing history. Jimmy Carter was the only fighter until this day to win a lightweight championship title 3 times, black or white. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuff series. All great fights, all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. Thanks for listening as I'm rambling off. I'll see you in the next conversation. Be well. Shout out to Trey X. I really appreciate you, brother. Thank you very, very much. Shout out to my sister Lala D. Peace. I got to recognize Joe Allen Boxing. Say hello to your dad for me. Nick Hammer and Martin Dunstan. Peace.